Latest in these terrifying attacks that are on U.S. soil. The massacre Saturday at a Pittsburgh synagogue, believed to be the deadliest attack ever targeting Jews in the United States. And another suspicious package was sent to CNN, intercepted today. This is similar to those 14 others found last week. And today, we want to give you the latest on the authorities and what they're doing. The suspects in these cases were in court today, the system grinding on. Pittsburgh shooter Robert Bowers in a wheelchair. He was wounded in that firefight with police. The prosecutor says he will be held accountable for this shooting that left 11 people dead.
He is detained in jail without bond. We will have the opportunity to present evidence demonstrating that Robert Bowers murdered 11 people who were exercising their religious beliefs, and that he shot or injured 6 others, including 4 of whom were police officers responding to the shooting.
That is on one track from the horrific events over the weekend. On the other, what you remember from last week in Miami, the suspect in those mail bombings faced a preliminary court hearing. FBI officials saying they're notifying anyone who is the subject of, quote, research by this bomb suspect, Cesar Sayoc, because there could be more devices that haven't been found yet that are moving through the mail. He may have researched over 100 people. Now, those incidents come days after a gunman killed 2 people at a grocery store in Kentucky. This is a separate shooting being investigated as another potential hate crime. Police say before the shooting, the gunman basically tried to go into a predominantly black church.
We received a tip that the suspect was seen outside of a local church where he appeared to, on video, have been attempting to gain access into the church. It appears to only be approximately 10 or 15 minutes prior to when the shooting incident occurred at the Kroger store.
If you haven't heard yet much about that double homicide, it's only because it wasn't even more deadly. This is part of just what's going on across the country. The White House saying Donald Trump will go to Pittsburgh tomorrow. A group of progressive Jewish leaders there says he's not welcome until he fully denounces white nationalism. Now, the only people responsible in a legal and ethical sense for these attacks that we know about are the people who commit them. And the president, this time, has tried to denounce them even more forcefully than in some past situations. That was clear in what he said over the weekend about the synagogue. But unfortunately, the story does not end there. And while Donald Trump may have spoken in ways that people found more acceptable this weekend in the short term, we are again seeing a pattern where there is no larger change in how he leads the country for the long-term basis. So judge for yourself. We'll just report out what's happening right now. Here is how Donald Trump sounded. This was hours after that suspect was arrested.
Well, I think I've been toned down. You want to know the truth? I could really tone it up.
Tone it up. Donald Trump then went on to go ahead and attack people and organizations who we all know now were targeted by this apprehended bomber. This morning, he was back at it, declaring the free press in the United States the, quote, enemy of the people, violent rhetoric. He also said Democratic donor Tom Steyer was a crazed and stumbling lunatic. He's one of the mail bombing targets. He also name-checked Maxine Waters on Saturday. Of course, this is after the week where we learned she was a target, saying she has a job-killing agenda. The White House today also said, though, in their view, it's outrageous to blame the president for any of the attacks, and they said he won't let up on his own tactics.
That is outrageous that anybody other than the individual who carried out the crime would hold that responsibility. The president's going to continue to draw contrast. Let's not forget that these same Democrats have repeatedly attacked the president.
We want to report for you everything we know. Authorities did not find the Pittsburgh suspect was a fan of Trump. He denied that. He also, though, posted conspiracy theories about issues that are in our political discourse, the caravan of refugees, for example. Now, hours before the Pittsburgh shooting, he also claimed, this is relevant, that a, quote, Jewish humanitarian group which helped refugees was part of this effort to bring these undocumented immigrants into the U.S. He saw that as an effort to bring violence into the U.S. We can also tell you a member of this synagogue, who was the president of the hospital where this suspect was being treated, described talking to the shooter.
The gentleman didn't appear to be a member of the Mensa Society. He listens to the noise. He hears the noise. The noise was telling him his people were being slaughtered. He thought it was time to rise up and do something. He's completely confused. And the words mean things, and the words are leading to people doing things like this, and I find it appalling.
The words that people choose do not make them responsible for everything that happens in the United States. But people in positions of leadership are still responsible for their words.
what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist.
A nationalist. In other words, a leader who puts his own country first.
Do you ever see when the fake news interviews them and then they try and cut it, but they'll go to a person holding a sign who gets paid by Soros or somebody, right?
Do you believe George Soros is behind all of this, paying these people to get you and your colleagues in elevators or wherever they can get in your face?
In that caravan, you have some very bad people. You have some very bad people.
A very serious, very dangerous situation is about to boil over at our southern border.
I'm joined tonight by Maya Wiley, a former counsel to the mayor of New York City and former chair of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, which oversees the conduct of the NYPD, as well as Rick Stengel, a former undersecretary of state, a diplomat for President Obama, as well as managing editor of Time magazine. And we'll be joined by Michael Eric Dyson in a moment. It's a difficult conversation to have, and it's not one that anyone, I think, responsible wants to push past what we know and what is basically causal. And yet, Maya, you and I have talked about this before at this table and elsewhere. It is possible to note the obvious reality that the president is not the direct cause of these things, and I'm not reporting that he is, and yet there is a violent rhetoric and a climate of hate that is a big problem, not only in our politics, which is narrow, but in our society tonight.
That's right. And I think one of the issues here is that we have a president who has led not with caring and compassion, but with confrontation. And one of the things that is unfortunate is that we've seen both a spike in hate crimes following the election. We have actually seen in 2016 and 2017 significantly higher numbers than we saw in 2014 in terms of hate crimes. So for the president, one thing that is clear is whether it's causal or not, there is no question that we have had a dramatic spike of hate in this country that is not something that the president has taken active and explicit measures to confront, nor has he even addressed it as a leader with a tremendous amount of compassion. And if he has another problem, one is that he has had people in his administration who have been associated with white nationalist groups. Ian Smith, to name one. There are allegations that others like Stephen Miller have had close ties to white nationalists. The other problem he has is that, quite frankly, he has not actually suggested that any of this is something he is concerned about. One thing we should remember, there were memes during his campaign that were explicitly anti-Semitic. Whether or not he intentionally understood them to be, I don't know. But if you put Hillary Clinton's picture inside a Star of David and call her corrupt, many Jews would identify that as anti-Semitic. And the other thing that he did, remember, he was the first president since World War II who actually didn't acknowledge in his Holocaust remembrance that 6 million Jews were exterminated. So it's a complicated picture. No, there's no one factor, but I think it's impossible to avoid the fact that we have a president who is deeply lacking in compassion and leadership at a time when we need unity.
You know, let's define this. I mean, one of the terms that has become popular among people who fight terrorism is something called stochastic terrorism, which means a kind of terrorism that is fueled by mass media, by social media. It's the weaponization of grievance, the weaponization of mental disorder. This is something that ISIS practiced when they would preach against the West, and they wanted young Muslim men who had mental instability to take terrorist attacks. That's something similar to what we're seeing now, which is this kind of empowering of people who have no understanding of reality. One point I want to make, which I think people don't always realize, which is that the growth of American domestic right-wing terrorism, of right-wing militias, is much greater than any kind of foreign terrorism or Islamic terrorism that people are worried about. It is exponentially responsible for more deaths, and that's something that even the National Counterterrorism Task Force, which is under President Trump, has seen the rise of, which normally happens during Democratic administrations. It's now happening among this Republican administration.
Well, you say that, and it goes to the moral culpability part. The reason why the law cares about hate crimes is the same reason it cares about murder being different than a vehicular homicide, which, while tragic and resulting in the loss of life, is different than trying to hurt someone, which is different in turn than trying to destroy people as a sort of a private act genocide. because you're actually trying to kill people because they're black, because they're Jewish, because their views don't agree with yours. And so speak, if you would, to that and the diplomacy aspect. I mean, your situation as basically being, you've been a diplomat and a spokesperson for the United States. You've been someone who basically is out there saying to the world, this is what we stand for. And I wonder, what position does it put the United States in?
Well, it's an awkward position for the United States because we are normally on the side of human rights, on the side of free expression. I mean, one of the things that I think that people don't realize is there aren't two sides to the debate over free expression or freedom of religion. That's been decided.
Right.
We're a country that is for free speech. We are a country that is for freedom of religion. The problem with media and the problem with what Trump is trying to do is that he's trying to take things that have been debased and proven false and put them into the public debate and try to have journalists say, let's have one hand on the other. If I say that the sun orbits around the earth, you're not going to find somebody to kind of back up that point of view. You're going to say that's absolutely wrong. That's what we need to do with those false assertions that he's making.
Yeah. Both of you stay with me. As promised, I bring in Professor Michael Eric Dyson from Georgetown University, his most recent book, What Truth Sounds Like, RFK, James Baldwin, and our unfinished conversation about race in America. Your work, including that book, looks at how the discussion of equality and civil rights in America involves political violence. We were just discussing domestic terrorism. There was a lot of domestic terrorism waged by people in the United States against black people, as well as some white people who were down riding with black people. That's the history. Educate us on how you see that connecting, not that it's the same, but connecting to the problem we're now facing here, which is resurgent violent hate in America.
Well, as Sister Wiley and Brother Stengel have already articulated, it is true that atmospheres make a difference. And as you so eloquently articulated, it is not that we're asserting a one-to-one relationship of causal effect between what Trump says and what people do. But the atmosphere is changed. The atmosphere is not responsible for a rose growing or not directly. Horticulturalists and others encourage it to grow. But the atmosphere permits it to be sunk into soil that will propagate it as a particular plant or kill it. And what Trump is doing is similar here. Look, when you talk about domestic terror, Brother Stengel is absolutely right, except many progressive African-American and other activists have been trying to say this forever. It is not Muhammad about whom we should be concerned. It's Bubba. And in the context of American society, there is fast and slow terror. Fast terror, bombs dropping, vicious acts being executed, war being committed against vulnerable populations. Slow terror is the everyday form of genocide and assault upon people's sensibilities. And here we see a convergence of acts and eruptions of fast terror, the assault upon these vulnerable souls at worship in a synagogue, the very sanctuary against the criminality that was leveraged against them. And then the slower terror of a president using his bully pulpit to bully people, not to encourage them, not to console them, not to offer words of consolation in the midst of grief, but to re-inflame and reignite the heinous passions that claim people. And as the Dr. Cohen said, this guy's not a member of Mensa Society. Yeah, it's the fact that he gets radicalized. We talk about the radicalization of our citizens. He was radicalized by listening to people on the internet, folk who spew half-truths, and let's be honest, whether it's Sarah Huckabee or Donald Trump, the half-truthing of our analysis here leads to people getting radicalized like this man.
Let me take that to Maya Wiley, because as attorneys, we can understand that most speech is not banned for good reason. But debates about who should run the government aren't just about whether you are allowed to say something or go to jail, which is what other countries do, but also whether you should say something. And so as we look at a president who, in this hyper-violent climate that we are now in, and if anyone didn't know we were in it, everyone knows it now, uses words today, like enemy, to describe other people that are in the, whatever you want to call it, arena of civic life, at what point does everyone else have to stand up and say, he might mean it with a wink if you want to be charitable, but it's not good enough at this moment to use that kind of language with a wink when people are misinterpreting at best and murdering?
Look, let's back up. Donald Trump had incited violence during the campaign. In fact, he was sued for inciting violence during the campaign, and a judge actually let that suit go forward, saying there was sufficient evidence that, in fact, it was not protected First Amendment speech, but in fact may have been inciting violence, because he literally invited people in his crowd to take care of and get people out of the rally. Remember, this is also the president who said to police officers, oh yeah, when you're putting them in the police car, go ahead, don't be gentle, go ahead and knock their... No, we're talking about people who are being arrested, not actually convicted of any crime, not to mention that even if you are convicted of a crime, it is against our laws to then physically abuse people.
And you mentioned that the acting DEA spoke out against that from within the government, saying to his officers, that's not what we do.
That's exactly right. So we actually have a president who has, both as a candidate and as a president, ignored our own laws.
Right.
He's actually ignored our own laws. So once you get to your question, Ari, he has demonstrated not only will he be divisive, whether it's intentional or not, right, by othering, by saying it's actually nationalism, and the language of nationalism is typically about white people have been harmed in this country. And by the way, way too many white people are suffering without jobs, without access to higher education, struggling for housing. But to blame it, on people who are different, to blame it on immigrants, to blame it on black people, that's actually the implicit message of Donald Trump, which has only supported white nationalism.
Before we go, Michael Eric Dyson, you've spoken from many churches and many houses of worship. Next up, we're going to hear from Jonathan Greenblatt, who runs the Anti-Defamation League. I wonder what you think about the religious component of this as we come out of a weekend where I know at a lot of synagogues and a lot of churches and a lot of mosques this weekend, a lot of people were thinking about what is safe for prayer in America.
Well, that's absolutely right. Let me very quickly say, though, nationalism is different from patriotism. Patriotism is the critical celebration of one's country in light of its best virtues and values. Nationalism is the uncritical celebration of the country regardless of its moral trajectory or arc, and that's what we must reject. When we think about religion, think about the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who said not all are guilty, but all are responsible. And this is what we feel as religious members, co-congregants, if you will, in the sanctuary of American democracy. Those poor souls who lay prostrate there as a result of the invidious assault upon them. We don't feel safe in our houses of worship. We don't feel safe anywhere. And so religion must rise up. Instead of sanctifying and legitimating the evangelicals on the fringe, what Donald Trump does, let's call this nation to conscience, to prophetic witness for the values of true democracy and love and celebration of our difference, not the besmirchment of people, not the othering of people, as Ms. Wiley said, Attorney Wiley said, and not the demonization of people because they are different from us. Religion brings us together. Yes, this is where e pluribus unum meets the fact that we are a beloved community, regardless of our religious orientation. We worship God, and those who are religious look to a higher power. We have to become vehicles of that higher power. And a Jewish rabbi also said that the voices of the victims are the voice of God. That's what we must hear here today.
Wow. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.